HDR or high dynamic range. We will be shooting HDR today with the built-in feature of our camera. I will be using a Nikon D800 DSLR. One problem with shooting HDR with the built-in feature of my D800 is that your camera doesn't allow to shoot in RAW. So it switches to JPEG, and this image, a ready HDR image, is saved as a JPEG. So let's see how to do HDR with the built-in feature of our camera. This is not the best way to shoot HDR. Ideally, you should shoot individual raw images, separate exposures, and merge them later on in software like Photoshop or Photomatix Pro. But if you want instant HDR, you don't want to spend a lot of time in post-processing, and you get a decent result, this is how you do it. This is a regular photo out of the camera in aperture priority mode. If we expose for the highlights, the brightest areas of the scene, our shadows go absolutely dark. If you set your exposure for the shadow areas or the dark areas of the scene, your bright areas or the highlights are washed out. So if we could somehow get the shadow details from one photo and the highlight details from another photo and combine them or blend them together in some software, then that would be a correct exposure for shadows as well as highlights. And this technique is called as HDR. If we see the next photo, we have shadow details as well as highlight details. So let's see how to do this in your camera without any external software. Let's go to the menu, and in the shooting menu, there is an option called HDR or high dynamic range. By default, it is off. Inside the HDR menu, we have three options: HDR mode, exposure differential, and smoothing. Inside the HDR mode, we have three options: on, series, on, single photo, and off. Off is HDR mode off. On single photo means your camera is in the HDR mode. So next picture that you take will be a HDR photo, and the camera will come back to the off mode. So you are out of the HDR mode and you can shoot your regular photos without HDR. HDR mode on series means whatever photos you take henceforth will be HDR. If you want to come out of the HDR mode, you have to go to the menu and select off and come out of the HDR mode. So right now we'll be shooting a series of pictures for testing. So we will choose HDR mode on series. Next option in the HDR mode is exposure differential. By default, it is on auto, and the options of exposure differential are auto, 1 EV, 2 EV, and 3 EV. So what it means is, if you select 3 stops or 3 EV, your camera will take different exposures with a gap of 3 stops. Next option is smoothing. By default, it is on normal. Inside the smoothing menu, there are 3 options: high, normal, and low. So we will try each of these options one by one. Let's begin with our unedited out of the camera without any HDR photo. So let's start with this photo. For this photo, we have exposure differential 3 EV and smoothing high. For this photo, we have smoothing level normal. And for the last photo, we have smoothing level low. So let's quickly see these images in a sequence. Listen carefully to the sound of the shutter when the camera is out of HDR mode in the normal shooting mode, and when the camera is in HDR mode, the shutter sounds different. What the camera is doing is, when the mirror goes up, it is taking number of images very fast, and that's why the shutter sounds different. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to regularly get updates from my YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell shaped icon next to it to get regular notifications on your mobile. Thank you.